Okay, welcome back to another cooking show with us. Trying to show you something different. Last time we were working on some artisanal bread. Told you that we like to do different things. So today we're going to tackle one of the things that a lot of people don't like to do because they find it to be a little bit daunting, is doing a beef brisket. Now, a beef brisket, that's basically the chest portion of cow. A lot of you have had beef brisket and don't even know it. When you get corned beef and cabbage, we just had St. Patrick's Day and lifted a pint of Guinness or whatever you like to have. Those things, that's a same type of brisket. They've just put it in a different type of brine. And then when you cook it, you're typically cooking it with like a pickling recipe. And so it's able to go in and change the flavor somewhat. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this brisket. Now, this is one that I get from Costco. Now, you can get them from wherever you'd like. Our particular local Costco does a pretty nice job of getting good briskets in. And when you're looking for it, you're looking for a few things. You're looking for, if you're getting the whole brisket, it's going to have this thicker end up in the front. This has a lot of fat in it. We're going to carve some of that out. And then it has the smaller part of the brisket. A lot of people get just that. You can go to the store and just find this narrower part of the brisket and cook that up if you're not looking to do a huge brisket. I happen to like the larger ones. I like cutting out the marbling of the fat. My dogs love that. Yes, you could render it out for yourself, but we get enough of that anyway. So what we're going to do is cut the fat off. And actually, I'm going to show you how to put a rub. And we're going to put it on a smoker. And we're going to smoke this thing for probably at least 12 to 15 hours, depending on how it's cooking and how cold it is with the wind blowing. I use a Traeger pellet smoker. Now mine looks actually like just a regular grill, but it's actually a smoker. And it has a hopper on the side. It's a big box that you put pellets in, and they can be different types of wood. We're going to use a signature blend that they have that has 3 different types of woods, and we'll talk about that later. I'll show you how to prepare this meat, and then as we go along, try to be able to get you to understand some of the nuances of doing this. Now, I've been told that I needed to show a little bit more smiling and stuff as I cook, because I'm normally kind of a light guy, but when you're talking to a camera lens and nobody behind it to make jokes with, it's kind of tough. So I'm going to do my best to give you some smiles and some stories as I go along. And maybe I'll get better at this. If not, too bad, but at least you'll learn how to do some cooking. So we're starting out with this brisket. When you get to be my age, you start figuring you have to use glasses every now and then. This is coming out to be about a 20-pound brisket. So this is about a 20-pound brisket. It's not the biggest I've ever done, but it's on the larger size. A lot of briskets that people get, they're probably in the more 10, 12-pound range. But that's more of that half-size brisket. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by, we're going to take this plastic wrapper that they give us off of this thing. Now I do recommend clean your countertops. I try to have a tray under most of this to catch any of the juices. But again, once you're done, just make sure you clean everything up. Some people will do this on newspaper, however they like to do it. It's up to them. All right, so as you can see, we have quite a lot of marbling going on here. A lot of fat going through it. Now, a brisket, being it's that chest piece, is very, very tough, okay? So you have to cook this low and slow. Okay, so that means when we put it on the smoker, we're not putting it on a high heat. We're not doing it like in an oven at 350. And by the way, you could cook this in an oven. Just make sure you're doing it on a very low temperature. We're going to set up our Traeger, which does have thermostatic control, to 225 degrees. So anywhere in that 200 to 240 degree range is a good slow temperature. With that smoke hitting it all the time, you want to get that. They call it a bark. It's the coloring and the texture on the skin after it's had a lot of smoke and heat applied to it. What will happen with this is as this, all of this meat, all of the parts within the meat that are, the fibers, they need to break down. Otherwise, it's a really chewy piece of meat. So you've had a piece of meat before, it tastes like shoe leather, or it's really, really hard to cut. And even if you've gotten a really nice steak, sometimes they're just difficult to cut. Sometimes how they cut the steak, but often it's time because they cooked it so fast, it didn't have any time for those tissues to break down. So, when you have a muscle, you've been working that muscle, it has to break down, when you want to get it to make it something that you're going to want to eat. So, what we're going to do is we are going to take and cut off excess fat. Now, you don't need to cut off all the fat, but when you're doing this, and be careful, because you don't want to cut yourself, what we're going to do is we're going to be going in here and looking at the marbling. Now, you can see, even with this is a very, very sharp chef's knife. I also recommend using a sharp knife. Some people use their own kitchen knives, but as you can see with this, you can see we have a little bit of meat on here, but most of this is solid fat. Now, my dogs are going to love this little piece, but I don't recommend using a dull knife. If you have a knife at home, you can always get them sharpened. You can buy sharpeners at the store, and they work okay. If you're really using a good knife, like a chef's knife, these are Wüsthof. They're not cheap. Now, that's neither here nor there. My grandmother worked with old pots and pans that were dented, and she had knives that were just junk knives, but she always kept them razor sharp. So whether you use a whetstone, whether you use a sharpener, you can get the electric sharpeners, whether you take it to a service to get it sharpened. But you want it sharp so you don't have to really work hard at cutting things. And I will tell you from experience that when you get these things sharpened, if you don't remember you just got them sharpened, you should slow down before you start cooking or cutting with them, because you can cut right through your finger, right through the bone. I have done some times where I've gotten them back. My wife has taken them to a service, and she got them done, and I forgot she had them done. And I'd be doing some chiffonading of vegetables, and that's basically a fancy way to say that I was doing very, very fine cuts of vegetables, where you take the vegetable and you're sitting there chopping like this and making very thin onions or whatever. And I found that I took a part of my nail and had to throw it all out because you can't eat nails. Well, I guess you could, but most people wouldn't want to do that. So with that being said, always be careful what you're doing with knives, but it's best to work with a sharp knife, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, a couple things here. You'll notice there's some marbling here in the center. I may take a little bit of that out, but honestly, if there's 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch of fat on there, that's just going to give it flavor. But you can see that center part, I've taken a lot of fat out of there. Haven't taken it all out, and there's marbling even going down into here. That'll cook nice, and it'll break down over time. And we come to the other side. See that big wedge of fat right there? Now you're saying, well, Bill, I can hear you. Well, Bill, if you have all this fat, why don't you just get the smaller piece and not have to deal with that? Well, I happen to like to trim my own. I happen to like to get it to the point where I think it's going to be the right amount of marbling. Sometimes you make a mistake and you'll find out you have this big glob of fat that you weren't planning on. But for the most part, it makes it something that's a lot better to taste. And my dogs do love that I do this, and I think they would be very angry at me if I started getting stuff that I didn't have to trim up and give them food at the end. So, you don't want to have a bunch of angry puppies at your house. Now, this is actually coming out a lot less fat than I thought. But check just a little bit under here. Okay, I found a vein here. And again, all we're doing, trying to get within, I don't know, 1/4 inch of the meat. So we don't just have a big pocket of fat. When you go to a restaurant that serves brisket, they usually have 2 different types of brisket that you're buying. You're buying either lean or just regular brisket. When you're getting lean, you're getting the section that didn't have this fat in it. That's what my wife actually likes to eat. Isn't that right, Deb? You like the lean.
I like the lean.
She likes the lean. So, she likes the way I do this because it makes a majority of the brisket fairly lean. Y'all can speak amongst yourselves while I'm cutting this. But off of a 20 couple pound brisket, I expect to get a couple pounds of fat if you're cutting it right. So you can see right here, really not too much in the way of hitting meat, which is good. Well, we've taken that pocket out a little bit right there, but I don't really care that much. Now, this is the one thing that I'll tell you, in working in restaurants, I've worked in North Carolina barbecue restaurants in the past, and one of the most tedious things they have to do is trimming up the fat off of these things. So when you go to a restaurant and you wonder why it costs you so much money, it's because they've paid somebody to do what I'm doing in front of you today, and it's just time consuming. So if a company is doing a lot of brisket, if they're really trimming it up like this, it's taking them quite a bit of time compared to just taking like a pork butt or whatever and throwing it on the smoker without hardly any type of work. So we've now gotten this pretty well trimmed up. I'm going to wash my hands first and I'm going to put a rub on it. Now, I will say it's very important anytime you're working with food, making sure you have a clean environment. Make sure that you do keep clean. You don't spread anything around. Right now, with all the stuff we're dealing with, you're learning about how to protect yourself and keep everything good. But we've been doing that in the food industry for decades. You know, we're talking about foodborne type of illnesses and such. So you want to keep things good temperatures, you want to keep things in good places, and then once you're done, you want to clean counters with appropriate cleansers and stuff so that you don't have to worry about that the next time you're touching a counter. Now, I have made my own rubs before. A rub is basically a bunch of spices that you throw together. Oftentimes it's got cumin, which has kind of got a real earthy flavor to it. They'll use cayenne peppers, all sorts of chilies. Sometimes you'll use brown sugar in a rub, pepper, black pepper, salt, a lot of salt, garlic, all those kind of things. You can make your own rub. There's also a ton of rubs that you can buy at the store or you can buy online. So it just depends on what you're looking for. Now, when we're looking at dealing with a rub, I actually like to use the Montreal steak seasoning. They don't pay me anything to say that, but I think it's got a nice blend of stuff in it. It's got salt, it's got black pepper, red pepper, garlic, onion, and a few bits of paprika in it. So I think it makes a very nice rub. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on, and it may seem a bit heavy-handed, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this in and get this into the tissue. And this is a lot of meat. So, you know, all said and done, we're looking at probably close to, we're probably looking close to about 17 pounds of meat here. Now, granted, it's going to cook down. So you'll probably have somewhere around 14 pounds of meat when you're done. But 14 pounds of meat is a lot of meat. So don't worry about being a little bit heavy-handed. Now, if you're making your own, or if you've never done this before, you know, you can go light on it the first time and then add to. But you see, I've even put it in this cavity that we cut. Remember, we took the fat out here, because it's all going to cook. Now, the nice thing about doing this is this meat, it could sit overnight in the refrigerator, let it dry out a little bit before you put it on, or you can put it on just as is, and that's what we're going to do in just a bit. I don't want to do any of that to my fat. I'm just going to cook it down for the dogs, so they don't need it seasoned. So, back to where we were. Oh yes, smile. There you go. I'll smile. So, we've got about a 20-pound brisket. We've cut out all the excess fat off of it. We've taken and done a rub on this meat. We're going to put it in a smoker, sitting just raw on the grill, and we're going to have it sitting there for about, I would say, between 12 and 14 hours before we check it. Typically, I run mine overnight because my Traeger will actually keep it at 225 with a thermometer probe. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check a temperature in the morning. I'll record that for you and put that into this video as well. We want it to get to about 160 degrees temperature, and then we're going to take that meat and we're going to wrap it in aluminum foil. Now you can do it in butcher's paper, you can leave it alone, just leave it on the rack, or you can do like I do in aluminum foil. And what we're going to do is let it finish roasting in that 225 heat for about another 3-4 hours, or until it hits about 200 degrees. 195 to 205 is what we're looking for, because when it hits that, we know that the tissue is broken down enough. We know that it should have cooked long enough, because that's low and slow, remember? And we should have a good bark, a good coloring on this meat. And then when I bring it inside, we'll let it rest for 20-30 minutes. And then I'll cut some open and let you see what it looks like. Unfortunately, just like with my bread recipe, you can't smell it, but it will smell fabulous in here. I can tell you that. So, at this point, I'm going to cut and go get the Traeger ready. We'll take some video out there, and then we'll put it on there, and that will be all for tonight. And then tomorrow morning, we'll rejoin it when I have to wrap it, and then by about noon probably, or 10 o'clock, we'll take it off the smoker completely done and ready for you to see. So I hope you're enjoying this. I would like you to put comments down, share this to anybody that you'd like to see it. The more people that see me, the better. I'm very happy to share how I cook. People have been asking me to do this for years, so I finally got an opportunity. I'm trying out some new things. I'm using a new Nikon Z6, which has an auto focus function. I'm doing a lavalier mic for the first time. It's a wireless mic, so I hope this is coming out. Never done it before. And so a lot of firsts, but hope you're enjoying cooking with Bill, and we'll be back with you in just a few minutes. Okay, so what we're going to do is get this Traeger ready to smoke. I keep mine covered. I even have an umbrella behind it that I can use in case we have some bad weather. I put it up so it just keeps it from getting rained on. Basically, it looks like a grill. Inside has a slanted deck to catch the juices, go down into a tray that goes down into a catch bucket at the bottom. Don't have a lot of that coming on. Over in this side, we have a hopper, and this is where we put pellets. I'm using our signature blend. This has got hickory, maple, and cherry. Now I've got a little bit of apple already in, So at this point, my dogs always like to come out and eat these little pellets. Probably not the best for them, but it is just wood. Okay, so put some of the signature pellets in there. It'll last me overnight unless something happens where the pellets don't fall in. That's happened once or twice, but for the most part, it's a good deal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start the smoker up. Now, when you do that, it recommends that you let it smoke for about 5-10 minutes. What that's doing is that's burning off the initial amount of the wood chips. The initial burn before it gets up to smoking and heat actually doesn't have a great flavor. So what you want to do is let it get that initial smoke going, and then we'll be able to put the meat on. So I'll leave the lid up, or I'll let it start to smoke here in just a few minutes. Okay, so we had that first burn off. You saw that big white kind of smoke coming off, or grayish smoke. Once that's burned off, you're able to start putting your meat on. So we're going to go ahead and put the meat in the center. You want to put the fatty side up, so you let that fat render down through the meat as it cooks. Okay. Now I'm just going to take all these nice pieces of fat and just kind of spread them around. For the puppies. Now if you like fat and you want to eat it, that's fine too. Just make sure you cook it enough that you know it's all done, because I have some really thick pieces like this. They're going to take longer than the real thin pieces. Now, I'm not putting a thermometer on this yet, even though I have a temperature probe for it. Because my intent is to wait until the morning to do that, because I know there's nothing going to happen between now and when we get ready to look at it in the morning. It's going to be at 225 as far as the heat, and it's going to constantly be smoking, and so no problem with that. But when you get into the morning, we're going to want to check it with an instant read at a couple places just to see how it's doing. If it's not quite to 160, I'll probably put probes in it at that time, just to let it get to 160. That's the magic number that we're going to wrap it. I'll leave the probes in it until it's done at that 195, 205 temperature. Okay, so Traeger is really good. You can do it on just any kind of smoker that you have. You could do it on a big green egg if you have those, or if you have the ones that are out of Hawaii. I think they're called the Komodos. You can do it in your oven if you really want to do something in your oven. So you can just sit there and put it in a roasting pan, 225 degrees, but you're going to leave your oven on all night or all day long to do that same slow cook. So the time factors could be about the same. It's whether you want it inside cooking that whole time or whether you want it outside. Now, I personally like to smoke it, so using a smoker is the best way in my opinion. But if you have a wood smoker, do it just with a regular chunks of wood. When I was in a North Carolina barbecue restaurant, we just had a giant pit. We put wood underneath, and that's how you cooked it. You just had to watch your temperature. So when we come back in the morning, I'll show you what it looks like at 160, or at least I'll show you when I wrap it. And then after it's cooked, we'll open it up and have a wonderful brisket. I hope you've been able to hear me well using this microphone. Hopefully you're not picking up too much of the ambient noise that's around me. We have a water feature behind me that's gurgling water, and we have dogs that have been barking. But hopefully you're getting something out of this, and we'll go from there. So I'll see you in the morning. Get a good sleep. Okay, good morning. Right now it's about 6:30 in the morning. A little chilly out here. It's been running all night. Hopper's about halfway, a little more than halfway done. So, excuse my appearance. Just waking up to do this. I'm gonna go back to bed, but have to check it out. So, there's the brisket. Looks fabulous. That's a nice looking brisket. Now, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take a instant read thermometer. Okay, so about everywhere I tested, it's about 160, 170 degrees. So we're going to wrap this thing up. So with that said, I've got a big thing here of aluminum foil. Now, as I talked about in my baking, I like to use protection on my hands. These little oven gloves, gotta wash them afterwards, but they're really good for being able to lift up hot things. Okay, so we have brought the brisket in, but letting it rest for about 20-30 minutes, thereabouts. Again, some people will just wrap this up in a towel, put it in a cooler, let it just cool down on its own. One of the things you want to do with any meat that you're cooking, whether you're doing it on a stove, whether you're doing it on a grill, or you're doing a smoker, is you want to let it rest after you've cooked it. So if you cook a steak, for example, you want to give it at least 5 minutes or so, because you want all the juices, all the blood and stuff to run back into the meat fibers, and that way you have a juicy steak all the way through. The same thing is with a brisket. It's got a lot of juice that went down in this pan. I wanted as much of it to soak back into the fibers as possible so that you have a very juicy piece of brisket. Now, I was going to try to lift this brisket out and be able to put it on a sheet for you to see, but it's so falling apart tender that it's just going to break into a bunch of pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece of this for you just to show you what it looks like. Now, again, depending on how much fat you cut off, so if you see this, I'll get a little closer. If you see that pink? That's the bark. And that pink is all of the smoke that's gotten into the meat over time. So if you've smoked it properly, you're going to have a whole lot of a pink rim around it. And that gives it that bark on the outside. Now if you'll notice, this thing cuts with complete ease. I'm hardly having to push down on this knife. It's falling apart. See how you can pull it? Just pulls apart like that. Okay? I wish you could smell this. The whole house just smells so good. My wife walked down. First thing Deb said is, that is just fabulous. So, when you do this, again, It's going to make a lot of brisket, 20-pound raw, cut about 2.5 pounds of fat off, and then we smoked it. You'll probably end up with about 15 pounds when you're done. So we cut that into 3 5-pound sections. We vacuum pack it, put it away so we can eat it later. Just to give you an example, that's the fat that we cut off. That's probably a couple pounds of fat. And again, we smoked it just like the other meat, cut it up into tiny little cubes, give it to our dogs. Some people just like to eat it. I'm enjoying this brisket. I'm going to keep eating. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. Just remember, get a good cut. If you don't have a butcher, find some people that have been buying meats from wherever. Just like for me, I bought mine at Costco, found from a few other people that did smoking that Costco here in Leesburg, Virginia has some really nice grade briskets. I've been doing these now for, what, about 1.5 years, Deb? Something like that. And each time I get a little bit better. But you can't really go wrong unless you just try to cook it too fast. So you want that ability for this stuff just to pull apart in your hands almost. You want it to have a good bark on it. So to do that, it's going to take a decent number of hours smoking. Right now, it's about 10 o'clock in the morning here. So when we started at about 7 o'clock. So 7 to 7 was a 12-hour, 3 more, so we're at 15 hours. So somewhere between 14.5, 15. But again, the time is not as crucial as the final temperature, but you do want to have at least that long burst of time at the beginning to break down all this tissue. So when you're doing it, look at having a long-term cook. You can start it in the morning, have it done, sometime late in the day. I used to start at 7 in the morning, be done at 10 at night, and then put it in the fridge for the next day. I've actually found, since I trust my Traeger, that I can run it all night long. I just put it on the Traeger. If it's going to rain, I put the umbrella above it. You don't have to, but I like to protect the electronics. And then just let it run all night long. So, again, Cooking with Bill. If you got a better name for this segment, tell me what you'd like to have it. But I guess I could say bon appetit, but hey, this is brisket, so just enjoy.